Hollywood sells perfection, smiles that never fade, lives that never crack, dreams too glossy to be real. But behind the lights lies a darker truth: control, manipulation, fear, and the quiet collapse of people pretending to be gods. Some lied to protect their fame. Others lied just to survive. The machine polished their pain, edited their rage, and sold it back to us as legend. But what happens when the illusion breaks? When the stars we worship start to fall out of their own scripts? These are the 15 celebrities who lived a lie, and the world believed every word of it. 15. Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise isn't just a movie star, he's Hollywood's last great illusionist. For 4 decades, he's been the embodiment of perfection, the fearless action hero, the dedicated professional, the man who never seems to age or fail. On screen, he defies gravity. Off screen, he defies scrutiny. He runs, he smiles, he wins every time. But behind that megawatt grin and unshakable confidence lies a world built on control, secrecy, and the kind of devotion that borders on religion. Cruise's rise was meteoric, but it wasn't luck, it was engineering. His image was crafted down to the millimeter, every interview rehearsed, every relationship stage-managed. He wasn't just selling movies, he was selling the myth of human perfection. Yet that myth came with a guardian, the Church of Scientology. Within its walls, Cruise became both disciple and deity. Insiders claimed the church protected him, silenced critics, and controlled the narrative of his life. Every scandal from leaked rants to failed marriages was quietly contained, rewritten, and reintroduced as part of his legend. To the world, he's tireless. He hangs off planes, breaks bones for stunts, insists on doing the impossible. But people close to him describe something else. A man who never stops moving because stopping would mean facing the silence. The need to prove, to conquer, to stay adored has consumed him for so long that even he might not know where the performance ends. Hollywood loves him because he represents its purest fantasy, endless youth, absolute control, eternal relevance. But in the process of becoming unbreakable, Tom Cruise lost the one thing every role he's ever played was chasing: authenticity. He once said, "I feel the need for speed." Maybe he wasn't talking about flying at all, maybe he was talking about outrunning himself. So what happens when the man who can do anything finally realizes he can't stop pretending? 14. Madonna. Madonna built an empire out of transformation. Every time the world tried to define her, she became someone else. The virgin, the rebel, the saint, the mother, the legend. For 4 decades, she's ruled pop culture by breaking rules, reinventing herself before anyone could replace her. To the public, she's immortal, a symbol of freedom and control, the woman who never needed permission. But behind the confidence, the reinventions, and the power, there's always been something Madonna never managed to escape: the loneliness that comes from living inside a performance that never ends. She's not just an artist, she's a construct. Every move, every scandal, every shock was calculated. Her relationships became headlines, her body became a battlefield, and her faith turned into theater. The industry called her fearless, but that fearlessness was armor, forged from rejection, trauma, and the constant terror of being forgotten. As she aged, the illusion became harder to maintain. The queen who once mocked fragility began fighting time itself. Surgeries, filters, denials, each new look more desperate than daring. The woman who taught the world to love themselves for who they are now hides behind her own legend, afraid to admit that even icons age. Her social media persona, manic and manicured, has replaced the raw provocation that once made her dangerous. What was once revolution now feels like repetition, the echoes of a woman who's been performing power for so long, she's forgotten what rest feels like. Madonna once said, "I am my own experiment. I am my own work of art." But art, when overworked, starts to crack. And the cracks are showing. She built a kingdom on reinvention, but every reinvention was just another disguise for the same truth. She never wanted to stop being seen, because being unseen meant being nothing. 13. Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt has always been Hollywood's golden man, impossibly handsome, effortlessly charming. The kind of face that could make silence feel cinematic. For decades, he played the role the world demanded: the perfect leading man, the cool philosopher of fame, the calm eye in every storm. But behind the elegance and easy grin was a man struggling to hold together an identity that had been manufactured for him long before he ever understood its weight. Pitt's rise was a fantasy come true, the Midwest boy who conquered Hollywood. His face was a marketing empire. His name a guarantee of box office success. But while the public saw confidence, he saw confinement. The industry turned him into a symbol of control and cool detachment, when in truth, he was lost inside the machine that fed on his perfection. His marriages only intensified the illusion. With Jennifer Aniston, he was the model husband, loyal, gentle, safe. With Angelina Jolie, he became the global icon, the activist, the father, the man of purpose. But behind the image of a loving family and humanitarian grace was chaos. Alcohol, anger, emotional distance, the quiet implosion of someone who had been pretending to be whole for too long. When his marriage to Jolie collapsed, the tabloids feasted on the story. Yet beneath the gossip was a deeper truth. Pitt wasn't falling apart. He was finally falling into himself. In later interviews, he began to speak softly about addiction, shame, and the need to rebuild. Gone was the swagger, replaced by reflection, humility, and the faint relief of a man no longer performing. He learned to sit with silence, to embrace imperfection. The golden man had tarnished, but in doing so, he became real for the first time. Brad Pitt's story isn't about failure or scandal. It's about awakening, about what happens when the symbol of perfection finally admits that perfection is a cage. He was Hollywood's ideal man for so long that the only way to survive was to stop being him. He once said, "Happiness is overrated. I think contentment is more realistic." Maybe that was his quiet confession. A man who spent his whole life chasing peace, not applause. 12. Jennifer Lopez. Jennifer Lopez has always been a master of the mirror, a performer who reflects whatever the world most wants to see. To some, she's the ultimate success story. The Bronx girl who became a global icon through sheer determination. To others, she's the woman who turned self-belief into an empire. But behind the glow of her perfection, the flawless skin, the sculpted control, the endless love stories lies a truth that's far less polished. Jennifer Lopez didn't just live a dream, she manufactured it. Every phase of her career has been an act of reinvention. The singer, the dancer, the actress, the mogul, each one carefully crafted to look effortless. Every heartbreak became a headline, every relationship a storyline, every comeback another chapter in the myth of J.Lo. She built her brand on relatability while living in isolation, surrounded by teams paid to maintain the illusion. Her authenticity wasn't organic, it was orchestrated. Hollywood adored her because she represented the fantasy it sold best: beauty as discipline, power as poise. But those who worked with her often described something colder, an empire built on control, image, and fear of losing relevance. She learned early that vulnerability doesn't sell unless it's lit perfectly. And so every documentary, every tear, every glimpse behind the scenes was just another layer of performance. Her romantic life became her greatest stage. Ben, Mark, A-Rod, Ben again, every name. Another plot twist in a never-ending love story scripted for the cameras. Each wedding was a reboot, each breakup a rebrand. She wasn't just surviving heartbreak, she was monetizing it. But perfection has a price. Those closest to her say the woman behind the empire is exhausted, fragile, terrified of stillness. The same ambition that built her throne has trapped her on it forever, performing the role of the woman who has it all. Jennifer Lopez once said, "I'm just like everybody else." Maybe she wanted to believe that. Because in a life where every flaw is photoshopped, the one thing she can't afford to be is real. 11. Ben Affleck. Ben Affleck has always been Hollywood's contradiction, brilliant yet self-destructive, confident yet fragile, a man whose talent often battled his demons in public. From Good Will Hunting to Argo, he became the American ideal, smart, charming, and resilient. But behind that image was a man who never stopped running from himself. Affleck's career was built on redemption arcs. Each rise was followed by a collapse, each collapse by a reinvention. When he won an Oscar at 25, he was supposed to be the next golden boy, but fame came too fast, and Affleck was too honest for illusion. The paparazzi hounded his every move, his romances became national headlines, and Hollywood learned to sell his instability as entertainment. His relationship with Jennifer Lopez in the early 2000s turned him into half of a brand, Bennifer. It was supposed to be love, but it became a spectacle. The media ridiculed him, calling him a joke, a prop in someone else's narrative. When they split, his career tanked. He turned to alcohol, lost roles, and lost himself. Years later, when he returned with Gone Baby Gone and Argo, critics called it a comeback. But Affleck knew better. He wasn't reborn. He was rebuilding what fame had broken. Even as he matured, the chaos lingered. Rehab stints, public divorces, leaked photos of him exhausted and detached. They all told the same story. A man who couldn't find peace in the dream he'd built. He once said fame was like living in a room where everyone has mirrors and you can't see yourself anymore. Maybe that's why he hides behind cigarettes and half smiles. It's the only way to feel human. Today, Affleck walks a fine line between survival and relapse, success and regret. He directs now, searching for meaning in stories about broken men trying to fix what can't be fixed. He's no longer pretending to be the golden boy, he's finally admitting he never was. Ben Affleck's truth is simple. He didn't just live a lie, he lived in the reflection of one. Hollywood gave him a crown made of glass, and every time it shattered, he cut himself trying to hold it together. He once said, "You have to be who you are, even when it hurts." One hell. For Ben Affleck, being honest has always hurt the most. 10. Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is Hollywood's most trusted man, the everyman, the moral compass, the gentle hero. For decades, he has been the embodiment of decency, the actor who makes goodness believable. From Forrest Gump to Saving Private Ryan to Cast Away, he became not just a movie star, but a cultural comfort, the man America believed in. But behind that flawless reputation lies a truth that Hollywood has carefully protected. Even purity can be manufactured. Hanks built his legacy on sincerity, but sincerity can be strategy. Every public appearance, every interview, every kind word is polished to disarm. His humility feels effortless, which is why it works so well. The truth is, Tom Hanks didn't just become the symbol of integrity, he learned to weaponize it. Insiders describe a man who is meticulous, controlling, and quietly ruthless about his image. He doesn't make mistakes, not publicly, at least, and that's exactly the point. For years, studios have relied on him as their moral shield. When the industry faced scandal, Hanks was always there, the reminder that Hollywood still had a heart. But even his goodness became part of the illusion. The kindness, the family man image, the carefully measured compassion, all of it meticulously curated. There's nothing sinister about it, just something deeply human, a man terrified of losing the perfection he built. His son's controversies, his own distance from Hollywood gossip, his obsession with privacy, they all hint at a fear that cracks the legend, because the higher you build the pedestal, the lonelier it gets on top. The man who once played Mr. Rogers understands performance better than anyone. Tom Hanks's secret isn't scandal, it's control. He's not the purest man in Hollywood, just the most carefully maintained. He once said, "If it wasn't hard, everyone would do it." End of 40. Maybe he wasn't talking about acting. Maybe he meant staying perfect while the whole world watches. 9. Reese Witherspoon. Reese Witherspoon has always played America's favorite archetype, the smart, charming Southern girl who wins with grace. From Legally Blonde to Walk the Line, she built a career out of optimism, resilience, and the power of a smile that could disarm anyone. But behind that sunlit image lies a woman who learned early that sweetness can be strategy, and that control often hides best behind kindness. Reese's rise wasn't accidental. She's one of Hollywood's sharpest business minds, a producer, entrepreneur, and mogul who turned her charm into currency. Her company, Hello Sunshine, made her not just an actress, but an empire builder. She's now worth hundreds of millions, selling empowerment while carefully managing every inch of her brand. But the perfection that makes her inspiring also makes her untouchable. She's built a fortress out of relatability, smiling, warm, but impenetrable. Insiders describe a woman who runs her image with military precision. Every quote, every Instagram post, every tearful speech about female resilience is tested, filtered, and polished. Her brand is empowerment, but empowerment can be performance too. When paparazzi photos of her arrest for disorderly conduct surfaced years ago, the night she drunkenly told a police officer, "Do you know who I am?" the world saw the real Reese for a moment. The mask slipped, but only for a second. Within months, the narrative was rewritten, and the incident became another lesson in redemption. Hollywood adores her, not because she's perfect, but because she knows how to play perfect, how to balance ambition with innocence, control with charm. She's mastered the illusion of vulnerability without ever giving away her truth. Reese Witherspoon once said, "I don't know what it's like to not have ambition." Maybe that's the secret. She doesn't act ambitious, she acts likable. And in Hollywood, that's a far more powerful trick. Her story isn't about deception, it's about survival in the spotlight. The smile isn't fake, it's armor. 8. Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr. is Hollywood's favorite redemption story, the man who fell from grace and came back shining brighter than ever. To the world, he's Iron Man, witty, self-aware, unstoppable. But behind the perfectly timed sarcasm and billion-dollar smile is a truth Hollywood rarely tells. Redemption isn't always as clean as it looks. In the 90s, Downey was chaos incarnate. He was the prodigy who couldn't get out of his own way. Endless arrests, mugshots, rehab stints, relapses. He was so far gone that studios refused to insure him. The tabloids called him finished. But Hollywood loves a comeback more than it loves the truth, and when he rose again, it was treated like resurrection. Marvel turned him into a myth, the genius who redeemed himself through discipline, faith, and gratitude. The world wanted to believe it. He became a global hero, a living symbol of transformation. But that story, like every great Hollywood script, was edited. The darkness didn't vanish, it was managed. Downey learned to turn his addiction into a brand, the recovered rebel, the wise survivor, the millionaire philosopher who spoke about pain in soundbites and sold humility with a smirk. Behind the scenes, those who've worked with him describe a man obsessed with control of his image, his career, his legacy. He doesn't just act, he engineers perception. His interviews are charming, but rehearsed. His vulnerability feels spontaneous, but it's planned. Downey rebuilt himself not by changing who he was, but by mastering how he appeared. And Hollywood helped, because his story sells hope, forgiveness, reinvention. The same system that nearly destroyed him now profits from his redemption. His life became the industry's favorite lie. That pain can be cured, that success equals healing, that fame is proof of peace. Robert Downey Jr. once said, "Remember that just because you hit bottom doesn't mean you have to stay there." But maybe he never really left. Maybe he just learned how to decorate the bottom so no one could tell the difference. 7. Alec Baldwin. Alec Baldwin has always been larger than life. The booming voice, the sharp wit, the mix of menace and charm that made him one of Hollywood's most magnetic figures. On screen, he's authority incarnate, confident, commanding, impossible to ignore. Off screen, he's the same man, only without a director to yell, "Cut." And that's the problem. For decades, Baldwin's temper was an open secret in Hollywood. He shouted at crew members, berated photographers, and left a trail of voicemail meltdowns that tabloids devoured. The world laughed it off. Another passionate artist, another difficult genius. His anger became part of the brand, an unpredictable energy that somehow made him even more compelling. But behind the bravado was something darker. A man constantly at war with himself, hiding insecurity behind arrogance and chaos behind control. Then came the tragedy that turned his volatility into horror. In 2021, on the set of Rust, a gun Baldwin was holding discharged, killing cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. The world stopped. The man who'd spent years playing authority figures suddenly looked small, fragile, terrified. Hollywood rallied to protect him. Statements, lawyers, spin. But for once, no amount of charisma could rewrite what had happened. The performance had finally failed. Since then, Baldwin has tried to carry on, giving interviews about grief, guilt, and responsibility. But his explanations sound hollow, like lines from a script he doesn't believe. The more he talks, the less convincing he becomes. The tragedy exposed what had always been there. A man addicted to control but incapable of mastering consequence. Hollywood once adored him for being intense, commanding, brutally honest. Now those same traits look like excuses for cruelty. And the industry that protected him for decades is quietly stepping away, one project at a time. Alec Baldwin's story isn't just about one accident. It's about the slow collapse of a man who mistook attention for absolution. He lived a lie built on dominance, and when it crumbled, there was nowhere left to hide. He once said, "I'm not someone who likes to be alone." But maybe that's because the silence has finally started talking back. 6. Julia Roberts. Julia Roberts has been Hollywood's eternal smile, the woman whose laughter could sell a dream. She was the girl next door who conquered the world, the actress who made romantic comedies feel like salvation. From Pretty Woman to Erin Brockovich, she became the symbol of authenticity, beauty with heart, power wrapped in warmth. But like every great Hollywood illusion, her charm was also her armor. Roberts's rise was a fairy tale, written by publicists and perfected by studios. She was sold as the embodiment of sincerity, approachable, grounded, incapable of vanity. But behind that golden image was a woman fiercely private and deeply calculating. She learned early that the best way to keep her life safe was to make the audience believe they already knew her. Every giggle, every wave, every interview was measured to perfection, enough openness to seem human, enough distance to remain untouchable. Those who've worked with her describe someone meticulous, even intimidating, a perfectionist who demanded control over her sets, her scripts, her lighting, her legend. It wasn't ego, it was self-preservation. Hollywood had turned her into the face of sincerity, but sincerity had become her prison. She couldn't age too quickly, couldn't falter too publicly, couldn't ever be ordinary again. By the early 2000s, the world began to tire of fairy tales. Her box office power faded, her private life became tabloid currency, and her silence grew louder. Julia retreated from the spotlight, trading red carpets for rural quiet, but even that retreat became part of her mythology. She was no longer the dream girl. She was the woman who walked away from the dream and made it look like liberation. In truth, Julia Roberts didn't disappear. She just stopped performing for free. She learned that sometimes the greatest power in Hollywood isn't visibility, it's refusal. She once said, "I'm just a girl standing in front of the world, asking it to love me." Maybe that's the real truth. The world loved the version she showed, but never the woman she hid. 5. Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey was the man who could make the world laugh until it forgot to breathe. From Ace Ventura to The Mask to The Truman Show, he became a force of nature, elastic, brilliant, unpredictable. To Hollywood, he was comedy's crown jewel. To audiences, he was joy personified. But behind those wild expressions and larger-than-life performances was a man quietly losing himself in the act. Carrey's genius was boundless, but so was his loneliness. Fame came fast, too fast, and the mask of humor quickly fused to his face. People wanted the manic energy, the explosions of laughter, the character who could bend reality. But when the cameras stopped, there was no applause, only silence. He once said that he spent so much time being everyone else, he wasn't sure who Jim Carrey really was anymore. By the early 2000s, his films grew darker: Man on the Moon, The Truman Show, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, stories about men trapped in illusions, questioning their existence. Audiences called them brilliant. Jim called them autobiographical. The comedian was trying to tell the truth in the only language Hollywood would accept: metaphor. After years of success, tragedy struck: the death of his former partner, the lawsuits, the tabloid invasions. The man who made the world happy was accused of cruelty, depression, manipulation. He withdrew from fame, growing a beard, painting, talking in riddles about identity and the nature of self. To some, he sounded mad. To others, enlightened. But beneath the philosophy was exhaustion, the pain of a man who had given everything, only to realize the laughter had never belonged to him. Hollywood likes happy endings. Carrey refused to give them one. He stopped chasing roles, stopped pretending to be funny, and started talking about illusion not as comedy, but as a curse. He said depression is your body saying, "I don't want to be this character anymore." Jim Carrey didn't lose himself to fame. He lost himself to performance. And in a world built on masks, maybe his final act was the bravest one, taking his off. 4. Angelina Jolie. Angelina Jolie was Hollywood's dark angel, beautiful, dangerous, untouchable. From Girl, Interrupted to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, she wasn't just a star, she was a phenomenon. Every headline, every performance, every glance felt mythic. She played seductresses, assassins, saints, and somehow, she was all of them at once. But behind that impossible range and defiant confidence was a woman who had spent her entire life trying to rewrite her own pain. Jolie's early years were chaos wrapped in glamour. A famous father who abandoned her, a childhood filled with extremes, self-harm, rebellion, obsessions with death. She wore her damage like armor, turning darkness into a lure. Hollywood didn't save her, it used her. The industry packaged her volatility as mystique, her trauma as talent. She became a brand, the beautiful broken woman who always came back stronger. Then came her transformation. She became a mother, a humanitarian, a global icon of compassion. The same press that once mocked her now praised her as Saint Angelina. But the reinvention wasn't redemption, it was survival. Her humanitarian work was genuine, but it was also control. For the first time, she could direct the narrative instead of being consumed by it. She mastered empathy like she once mastered seduction, as performance and protection in equal measure. Her marriage to Brad Pitt made her part of the most famous couple on earth. Brangelina was Hollywood's ultimate fairy tale, two beautiful rebels building a global family. But behind the smiles and charity work was a storm: power struggles, jealousy, addiction, anger, the kind of quiet war that no camera could truly capture. When it ended, the world chose sides. But the truth was simpler. Both had been pretending to be gods in a world built for mortals. Today, Jolie projects calm, but her eyes still hold the weight of someone who has seen too much. She's the rare star who turned pain into prestige, scars into power. But even power can become a prison. She once said, "I don't believe in happiness. I believe in peace." Maybe that's what she's been chasing all along: not love, not fame, not forgiveness, just the quiet truth behind all the lies. 3. Will Smith. Will Smith was once the safest star in Hollywood, the man who could charm anyone, make anyone laugh, and cross every cultural line without controversy. From The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air to Men in Black to The Pursuit of Happiness, he was the definition of success. He wasn't just famous, he was adored. He made optimism look effortless, confidence look holy. But behind that smile, the one that could sell hope to an entire planet, was a man slowly collapsing, under the weight of his own performance. Smith's career was built on control. Every move, every joke, every tear was curated for likability. He became a master of image, the man who never cursed in his music, who thanked God in every interview, who turned discipline into personality. He was Hollywood's model citizen, a brand of perfection so seamless that people mistook it for truth. But no one can be that perfect forever. The cracks started to show. Rumors about his marriage, whispers about open secrets, the pressure of always appearing in control, all of it simmered beneath the surface. Then, in 2022, during the Academy Awards, it finally exploded. The slap heard around the world wasn't about a joke, it was about years of repression, humiliation, and exhaustion. It was the moment the mask shattered in public. Afterward, Smith apologized, cried, and disappeared. The internet turned his pain into memes, his downfall into entertainment. Hollywood, the same machine that had praised his discipline, recoiled from his imperfection. His image, once unbreakable, was suddenly radioactive. But in a strange way, that breakdown was the first real moment of his career. The rage, the shame, the raw humanity, it wasn't performance anymore. It was the man beneath the brand, finally screaming for air. Will Smith's story isn't about one mistake, it's about the danger of being loved for a version of yourself you can't live up to. He spent decades playing heroes who always did the right thing. But real life doesn't follow a script. He once said, "I built my life on trying to make everyone else happy." Maybe that's the saddest truth of all, that in the pursuit of being everyone's hero, he forgot how to be his own. 2. Cameron Diaz. Cameron Diaz was Hollywood's golden girl, bright, funny, and effortlessly magnetic. She lit up every room, every scene, every decade she touched. From There's Something About Mary to Charlie's Angels, she was the woman who made chaos look joyful. To audiences, she was the embodiment of carefree charm, the girl who never took herself too seriously, who seemed immune to the darkness that swallowed others. But the truth was quieter and far sadder. Cameron Diaz wasn't carefree. She was just very, very good at pretending. Her rise was meteoric, but the shine came with a cost. Studios saw her as marketable innocence, the perfect mix of sex appeal and sunshine. For years, she was typecast as the fantasy, the dream girl who laughed at life instead of living it. The roles made her rich, but they also trapped her in a version of herself she didn't recognize. Off camera, she began to feel like a product. "I don't even own my own image," she once said, and she meant it. Hollywood didn't just take her face, it took her freedom. By the early 2010s, Cameron started to disappear. No scandals, no collapse, just absence. While others chased relevance, she walked away. The world called it retirement. She called it recovery. In interviews, she spoke about anxiety, exhaustion, and years of being told how to act, how to eat, how to smile. The woman who had built her fame on ease had finally admitted that none of it had ever been easy. Now living largely outside the industry, Diaz talks about peace like it's a new language she's still learning. She writes books about health, runs her own business, and speaks openly about rediscovering her identity. There's no bitterness in her voice, only relief. The camera no longer owns her. Cameron Diaz's story isn't about rebellion, it's about release. She didn't burn out. She quietly let go. In a world addicted to attention, she found the courage to disappear. She once said, "I just decided that I wanted different things out of life." And maybe that's the rarest Hollywood story of all, not a rise or a fall, but an escape. 1. Kanye West. Kanye West, or Ye, as he now calls himself, was never just a musician. He was a movement, a spectacle, a storm. For 2 decades, he shaped pop culture through sheer force of will, redefining hip-hop, fashion, and the limits of fame itself. He wasn't content with being great, he wanted to be godlike. And for a time, the world let him be. But behind that brilliance, that boundless ego, was a man unraveling in public. One lie, one outburst, one collapse at a time. In the early 2000s, Kanye was the prodigy who couldn't fail, the college dropout, who defied the system, and built his own. He turned pain into poetry, arrogance into art, grief into gospel. Every album felt like a confession, every interview like a sermon. But as the music grew louder, so did the madness. The man who once sought understanding began demanding worship. His genius became armor, and behind it hid paranoia, resentment, and deep, untreated pain. When his mental health began to fracture, Hollywood didn't help it monetized it. Every meltdown became a meme, every controversy a marketing campaign. He called himself a prophet. The industry called it content. Even his relationships, his marriage to Kim Kardashian, his family, his public feuds became part of the brand. He stopped being a person and became a performance no one could turn off. The spiral was breathtaking and brutal. Political rants, public breakdowns, anti-Semitic tirades, each one destroying another piece of his empire. Yet through it all, he insisted it was truth, not collapse. He told the world he was free, but his freedom looked like isolation. The same fame he once worshipped became his cage, and the world watched through the bars. Kanye West's story is a tragedy of modern celebrity, a genius who mistook attention for love and chaos for truth. He built a kingdom of sound, and then set it on fire just to prove he could. He once said, "I am a god." Maybe that was never arrogance. Maybe it was a plea from a man terrified that without the noise he'd simply disappear. Hollywood is a mirror. It reflects everything except the truth. It builds legends out of loneliness, turns madness into myth, and teaches its brightest stars that pretending is safer than being real. Every smile, every scandal, every reinvention is just another layer of survival wrapped in light. These 15 stories aren't about fame. They're about the cost of it, the exhaustion of becoming a brand, the emptiness behind applause, the quiet desperation of keeping the illusion alive. The world calls it success, but for many, it's just another kind of cage. Because in Hollywood, you don't get famous for who you are. You get famous for how well you can lie about it. And the greatest trick this town ever pulled was convincing the world that it still believes in truth.